Hi everyone, welcome to this talk, CICD pipelines with Tekton. One second. There we go. It would help if I select the screen. Okay, so my name is Cari Liebenberg. I'm a cloud native engineer at Container Solutions. I'm from South Africa and I'm working in Amsterdam. I also just want to do a quick shout out to our events page, container-solutions.com events. If you want to take a look at any of the events we have, we're often doing free training sessions on like Istio or CICD pipelines with GitLab, so it's worth checking out. A little bit about me at work or what I do. I do a lot of learning. I like to think I'm innovating all the time. I come from a development role and I've moved into more of an ops role. I like cloud native, I like all things cloud, and that includes Kubernetes and containers, and I like keeping things modular. And kind of why I'm even here is when I first started at Container Solutions, I had some downtime before I got on a project and I took a look at Tekton. And this is kind of like some feedback from my Tekton sessions. When I'm not at work, before COVID, I used to skate. I used to play roller derby. But unfortunately, because of COVID, we're not doing full contact sports at the moment. So I kind of, whenever I have a gap for downtime, I play Horizon Zero Dawn on PlayStation. So this is kind of a joke based on something I read on a Kubernetes Twitter account. When I first tried to explain Tekton, I put quite a big chunk of DevOps into it and kind of decided to remove all of that. I tried to explain DevOps to a friend. Now we're both confused. It just never ends well trying to define DevOps. It's like a spiral, but it is a big part of what I do. I'm really interested in DevOps, really interested in the DevOps ways and understanding and exploring different DevOps techniques. Cool, let's begin on Tekton. What is Tekton? So kind of thought of it as kube control apply CICD, and but it really you can apply the Tekton using normal kube control apply commands. Tekton is an extension of Kubernetes. They use CRDs, custom resource definitions, so you can interface with them just like you would Kubernetes scripts, Kubernetes resource YAML files. The pipelines in Tekton are first-class citizens, so you're literally coding the pipelines from the ground up. Tekton came from the Knative project, if you're familiar with Knative, and they've put it in its own project. It's also just a lightweight solution for playing around with pipelines. What is Tekton not? So Tekton is not an out-of-the-box solution. It's not like Argo CD or Jenkins where you install it and then you can kind of just write a Groovy script and then your pipelines are handled. It's kind of the other way around. You're coding your pipelines from the ground up. So you have to do a lot of configuration to get your pipelines to do what you need it to do. And it's not standalone. So you need a Kubernetes cluster to run Tekton. I mentioned custom resource definitions earlier, CRDs. Just quickly going over that, just a quick, so custom resource definitions are just an extension of Kubernetes they use the operator pattern. And they allow you to use Kubernetes resources in the same way you would, so a kube control pod, kube control get, kube control create, that kind of stuff with these resources. And yeah, so it's the Kubernetes functionality out the box, but you get to use it with your own custom structured resources. The main project to start off with is Tekton pipelines. It's really great to install because you just go kube control apply. There's no Helm involved. Not that I have an issue with Helm, but just it's really simple to apply Tekton pipelines to your cluster. And then the resource types, these are the most common resource types that you'll work around with. And I've got some demos for these resource types. There's also just a quick mention that there's the beta API versions of these resources, and then there's the alpha. And the reason I mention that is because I'm going to show you a resource that I still think is really great to know about, even though it wasn't bumped up into the beta. It's still pretty cool to play around with if you can, though they might not support it going forwards, but I'm still secretly hoping they're going to move it up to beta. So taking a look at Step. Step is the smallest part of Tekton, the part that does the things, the things you need it to do. Steps, you will provide like a name, like you would with most Kubernetes resources, and it requires an image. So it's a bit like a pod, or let's say more, it's like a container on Kubernetes when you create a pod. And you provided the image you would like to run. Oh, sorry, one step back. And you provided either the command, or if you want to run a script, you can run a script. And so it gives you that declarative and imperative choice. Do you want to go the declarative route, then use command? Do you want to go the imperative route? You can still do that with script. These two examples are just two different ways of doing a cat on a README file. Then task. So task will run as a pod when you run as a task, and Step will run as a container inside the pod. And in the task, you define the steps. So tasks are the smallest part in terms of a resource that you actually run on Tekton pipeline. And it's also, you just give it a name. You can reuse tasks. And I'll mention in a second why that's important. So task runs are what actually trigger your task to run. When Kubernetes sees a task run, it triggers the tasks, the steps in the tasks. The task run cannot be reused. You have to have a uniquely named task run. So in this example, I've got a prefix and I use a timestamp at the end to kind of give it a unique name. Your task run will have a task ref, and that will reference the tasks you want to run. And then pipeline is where you actually start to now combine your tasks. So this is where it really gets like nice and reusable. You can build tasks that do a specific thing, and then you combine those specific things in a certain order on your pipelines. And you can share tasks over different pipelines. So in this case, you also, you'll give it a name, but then also you can pass down resources. So that makes it kind of reusable. Your pipeline can be used for multiple purposes. You just pass it the values that you need passed down into the pipeline. And you actually do that from the pipeline run side. So the pipeline run, similar to how a task run runs a task, the pipeline run is what triggers the pipeline to run. And also it has to be uniquely named. You'll specify the pipeline ref so that it knows what pipeline to trigger. And from this layer, you will pass it the resources. So for example, in this example, I have a pipeline resource that I passed down, which is the GitHub repo. So from the pipeline run side, I pass it the repo, which will then go to the pipeline. The pipeline will trigger the task runs, and then they pass down to the task the resources that I've described in the pipeline run. So it kind of trickles down through the chain, if that makes sense. But I'll demo it, and hopefully it'll make a bit more sense in the demo. So just to visualize quickly, I've been saying a lot of like pods and containers. I thought I would just quickly visualize that your task runs as a pod on Kubernetes, like a job actually, because it goes up and down. So if you think of it as running as a job that equates into a pod, and it leverages all the normal Kubernetes behavior. So you can set up volume mounts in your task. You can set up service accounts. You also like config maps and secrets. They follow RBAC rules on Kubernetes. So if you kind of think, and this is one of the things that make Tekton so powerful, is that you're leveraging Kubernetes. So you don't have to relearn a different pipelining system when you've already learned how to use Kubernetes. And so if you also look at the pipeline, a pipeline triggers each task as a pod. So when you trigger a pipeline, each task specified in the pipeline will equate to a pod running on Kubernetes. the resource that I wanted to talk to you about that I'm still really fond of, so it didn't get bumped up from alpha to beta, but it's the pipeline resource. I still think pipeline resource is one of the simplest ways to specify a Git repo to run your task from as a context. Without pipeline resources, it's kind of quite tricky to get your task to run with your repo in a workspace, so to speak. But I'll demo that. I have a demo planned. The other thing I like about Tekton a lot is the reusability. A lot of CICD solutions like GitLab, GitHub Actions, they kind of have a project to CICD relationship. So for each repo, there is a CI/CD solution attached to that repo, and I'm sure you can like tweak it a bit and make it many-to-many. But out of the box, Tekton kind of is a many-to-many type pipeline system. So you can share a pipeline as long as the projects trigger a pipeline run and pass down the project-specific variables or parameters into that pipeline. You can share it across projects. And then CICD, the continuous delivery. So you can achieve CICD with Tekton. You would need to look into Tekton triggers. Tekton triggers give you kind of like that trigger approach where if you make a change in your code and you push it to your Git repo, then your Git repo will trigger a webhook, and the webhook is what triggers the triggers on Tekton, and that will trigger the pipeline. So out of the box, Tekton Pipelines doesn't support CI/CD, but if you install Tekton triggers, then it'll allow you to do CI/CD. And then Tekton triggers is similar to Tekton Pipelines. You just need to go to the repo and run the install command, the kubectl apply, and then you apply Tekton triggers to your project. Another cool repo to look at if you're looking into Tekton is the Tekton Dashboard. It gives you a bit of a GUI to work with when you're building your pipelines. Also just a kubectl apply. And then Gitops. So you can do some fun Gitops stuff with Tekton. You can play around with it because, but you do need Tekton triggers to give you the trigger ability, but then you can kind of, I've summarized it as maintain your desired state of ops with Git events coupled with automation. So when you're making changes to your Git repository, like a commit to files, that will trigger, or if you want to do it on a release, that will trigger a pipeline to run some automated scripts that will then update your ops layer according to what you've committed in Git. And that's just one high-level way of using Gitops. There's a lot of creative approaches to Gitops as a solution. And really great to look into if you haven't yet. I really do recommend Gitops. We have a lot of content on our website if you're interested. So I thought something that I could also talk about a bit is in my experience of working with clients on all the different CI/CD tools, I've seen a couple of practices that have worked well, and these practices will work well not just necessarily for Tekton, but if you're here and you're interested in CI/CD, this will help with most CI/CD projects. So tips for creating maintainable pipelines. And I'm starting with this concept of pipeline patterns, and how I'm thinking of it is the elements of a pattern repeat in a predictable manner. So starting to break down parts of pipelines in a way that becomes like a language where when you say certain things, you know what that part of the pipeline is going to do. CICD, mentioned it earlier, is continuous delivery. CICD, thinking in that way of that you can make a change to code, and that change can end up being fully deployed all the way to production to your users. I've mostly seen CI/CD set up properly for staging environments or test environments. So for example, developers will push to their master branches the main branches, and the change in the main branch will then trigger the CI, and if the CI passes, it'll tag an image, push the image to an image repository, and then perhaps update another repository that's waiting for a version update that will trigger the CD pipeline to run. And then it'll take the image, deploy it to the test environment, and then maybe run some smoke tests, and then boom, your code has gone from a change in the code all the way to the test environment. I haven't seen many clients yet confident enough to do it all the way to production, but the idea is that if you were inclined to, you could do continuous delivery all the way from test to production and use like your environment promoting. Continuous integration. So when I'm talking about continuous integration, I'm thinking about like code quality assurance. So that's your automated tests, your code scans, checking for breaking changes, feedback loops to the developer if there's any issues or they're failing tests, your quality gates, just anything that'll pick up changes automatically for you while you're building your projects. And then also the auto build. So, and you can build with a tool like Kaneko, where you remove root from the build, and then you package it as an image, send it to an image repository, and kind of whatever next needs to happen happens, but that's your CI kind of handling its responsibility in the chain. Continuous deployment. And so the second part of the whole CI/CD journey, just getting that artifact or the image that you've created, getting it through to where it needs to go in production without needing any manual steps. So if you need to update Helm files, update versions, if you need to kube control apply, all of that is done automatically by, for example, a pipeline, and there's no more human input needed. And so often there's some sort of change management between CI and CD, so you don't truly get that whole continuous delivery approach. But if you can truly get like CI to bleed into CD to then, and like it just flows like that, you get something very powerful for your projects. And again, like CI/CD is something I see as not creating perfect projects. It's creating reactive projects. It's creating projects that are resilient. So when there are problems, you can come back from that problem much quicker. So if you didn't have CI/CD set up, and you tend to, without automation, set up these perfect scenario processes, and then when the perfect scenario doesn't play out, it's very difficult for the team to recover. But CI/CD does the opposite. It's anticipating that there will be problems, and it notifies you when those problems happen. And that's kind of what you want. So some of the actual patterns that I've started noticing, now we're getting like more granular, and like this is almost like what if I were to say like a granular definition of Gitops, is having this state that then gets synchronized somewhere else. So it's I'm calling it, and I've made up these terms, so go with me. I'm calling it the state synchronizer, and basically it's like when you have kube control, YAML files for Kubernetes somewhere, and then you want something to apply those changes to Kubernetes, then you would, I think of there being this like synchronizing step, an automated step that takes those files, runs a kube control apply, and then creates a state from them. And the same can be done with Tekton pipelines, because they're YAML, Terraform files, any kind of configuration as code structure could then kind of, we think about I'm storing a state, and then when I change the state, I want something to synchronize this defined state into an actual state somewhere else. Then like a combined repo, well, sorry, actually, excuse me. Think of this as planning out multiple projects that you want to behave in similar ways. So you could have project 1, project 2, project 3. Each of those projects have a Kubernetes folder with definition files of how that project should run on Kubernetes. But that project itself isn't actually what gets applied. That project, that part of it, the Kubernetes file, will be combined with all the other projects' Kubernetes files, and they will be combined in a combined repo. And then that repo will then be used in whatever way, and for example, synchronizing. So this is something I've seen, like some teams it helps possibly for security reasons or just for simplicity of keeping files together. They plan out that different repos have all their files in them, but they still pull out files into like an ops repo to do actual changes with. And this is often part of some GitOps strategies. And then kind of looking at the other side of that, one of my colleagues has coined it as the 11th repo, or like, I think of it as like the ring, the one that, you know, combines them all. But so once you have this combined repo, knowing what you want to do with combined repos, so not so much worrying about each individual project, but once you have this combined repo, planning what you're going to do with that, anything that happens before it is not important as long as the final state is what results. And then from that, you might want to do like a synchronization, or there's a lot you can do from there. Synchronizing is just came to my mind when I was thinking of all these ideas, but kind of the idea is that you think of it the next thing you can do in this chain of events on a combined repo. And then helper images, sometimes, so I can really see how with Tekton, you might be tempted to write a lot of imperative steps. You might create quite robust tasks that do a lot. They're responsible for a lot of steps. One way to restructure some of that would be to create helper images. So rather than creating a lot of steps in a task, create those steps kind of isolated into an image, because you expect those steps to always be run in a certain order, in a certain way. You shouldn't need to change those steps. So then you create your helper image, and then you rather kind of like run the image in the task as a declarative step and pass in any values that you might need in the image. And it's kind of like a Swiss Army knife image. You might use it with some AWS CLI stuff if you want to connect with AWS, Google Cloud, image builders. You could use like something, Terraform as well is great if you want to like do very specific things with Terraform. You can put it into a helper image. And or actually what's quite cool is when you need to use a specific version of Terraform, and then you use that versioned Terraform image on your images. But yeah, so it's just some ideas. Yeah, okay. And then kind of like to push on that idea. So this is kind of actually what I'm more excited about than the helper images. It's when you start wrapping the helper images in context. So like, for example, if you want to, you set up a Vault client, well, a Vault setup in an image, and then you pass the Vault details. Then you can document this context. So you have your helper image, then you document the context of how to use the helper image. And then it's also easier to pass on how to use these parts within a team. So it kind of becomes like a collaborative effort, and really help a team work together on pipelines. And then just some pipeline practices that I've come across while building some pipelines. The duplicate app environments. So we're often doing this for our applications, but I also think this will be really important for when you're building pipelines, especially with like Tekton. Make sure that your pipelines run identically for dev, pre-prod, and prod, with just maybe some values that change, because you don't want to have to debug and investigate what's breaking on your prod pipelines versus your dev pipelines. And infrastructurally, so this is not so much a pipeline pattern, just like an infrastructural pattern. And a lot of places are using an infra cluster and an apps cluster. Basically, the ops team can do whatever they want in the infra cluster before they do it to the apps cluster, test it out, figure out if it's going to break anything. And then and so the idea is that infrastructural changes should never break the apps cluster and prevent developers from continuing with their work. So it's kind of like a dev for infrastructure. And then apps becomes like the prod for applications. And then inside of applications, the developers will have their like staging, dev, pre-prod, prod environments and namespaces. So it's kind of like a layered layered environments from infrastructure level all the way down to your applications level. And then removing root from images. So this is just kind of like, Kaneko is one example. You don't have to use Kaneko. There's a lot of examples, a lot of options out there. When you're doing your image builds, you can use Kaneko to remove root from the build, and then you can push a rootless image up to your image repository. This is just a best practice. One gotcha with Kaneko, my colleague pointed it out to me. Kaneko uses root to remove root. So if you have any issues where you can't have any root whatsoever, Kaneko might not be the solution for you. But I've been working with clients that don't mind that Kaneko has roots. They're willing to like manage the risk of where they know the root is going to be. So it works for some environments. And then this is quite an extreme take on pipelines, but forced read-only infrastructure. So basically nothing can make changes to your infrastructure unless it's come through some sort of automation script or pipeline. And so you take away everyone's ability to do keep control apply, and you leave them with read-only access. They can still investigate and see what's happening on the cluster. They themselves have no permission to make the actual changes to the cluster. But that's an extreme take. I like the concept of it. I haven't worked with anyone yet that has officially done that. And then some gotchas with Tekton. So Tekton is the dashboard tool, which is a great little GUI to see what's going on. That dashboard tool is not multi-tenant out of the box. So you can't share it with teams and then restrict team access. When I first looked at Tekton, I thought it was possible. And then a colleague of mine pointed out that they struggled to get it to work. And then I was like, no, it's got to be possible. You just have to change RBAC and like give RBAC users and I tried it out on the weekend and it's not possible. So it's just, if you look into the dashboard repo code itself, there is a flag in the Go code to specify namespaces, but it doesn't seem like from the kube control apply dashboard script side, you can restrict those namespaces. So it's just something to be aware of, something to keep in mind. I'm hoping that they will change that, that they will make it more multi-tenant for different teams, because it's, you can actually, from the dashboard, you can run pipelines. So you don't want to give everyone access to run everyone's pipelines. So it's just something to keep in mind. And the tool itself is not fully mature yet. There's a lot of changes coming through, like for example, the pipeline resources not being pushed through to beta. So if they choose in the end not to support pipeline resources, if you're using pipeline resources, you have to rewrite your scripts so that you don't depend on those. But there are a lot of big tools using Tekton, like Jenkins X. I know there's OpenShift is looking at using Tekton. There's some interfaces that they're busy creating that you can use Tekton pipelines with OpenShift. So there is like a lot of systems that are trying to use Tekton and maintain Tekton. So I think there is, there's not too much concern about that you're going to be investing in this tool and then it's going to disappear. I think it's still going to be around for a while. Okay, demo time. So I've created a GitHub repo and I've set up all my scripts in the repo already. I'm going to try get out of full screen mode. Can you see the terminal?
Yes, we can see both sides, yeah.
Great, awesome. Okay, so I have done something possibly brave, possibly silly. I have a brand new cluster. So I haven't set up Tekton pipelines yet on this cluster at all. And I thought it would be fun to do it with everyone. I also thought, if we can do it this quickly, I hope that it inspires you to play around with it yourself.
Challenge is on.
Yes, let's hope I don't break the cluster. Cool, so first I'm going to, I just think this might, no, okay. I'm going to apply the pipelines. Cool, so now we see the namespace Tekton Pipelines was created. I should have actually shown you the namespaces before I ran this. You can kind of see all the CRDs setting up for Tekton. Okay, so we have a look. So now we see the Tekton Pipelines namespace being set up. Okay, looks like everything has been created. Okay, then set up the dashboard quick. Great. Okay, now I'm just quickly going to port forward the dashboard tool. Okay, it's not fully running yet. Oh, there we go. Okay, now it's running. Okay, just want to grab the pod name. Just quick. Port forward. Great. So there we have our dashboard tool set up. Okay, let's start playing around with some examples. So the first thing we need to do is we need to actually add, so I've written out a couple tasks. So these tasks have steps declared under them. So the first task, I am just triggering the cow say command from the fun box. We're going to see now what that does. Back to the README. Cool. So I'm just going to apply the tasks quick so that the tasks are in the cluster. So if I go control get tasks, and so I've applied these just on the default namespace because I'm allowed to. It's my own cluster. But yeah, so you can provide a namespace to these. You can combine it with customize and have customize manage the namespaces. It's just like normal YAML files. You can do some cool customizing with it. Okay, so now I've got the tasks there and no pipelines. So if I go get pipelines, no pipelines, and if I go task runs, no task runs, but task runs can also be written as TR. So this little snippet is going to allow me to quickly run a task run, and it's going to timestamp it. Now, if we run that command again, now we've got that task run. Now, I just hope that it runs as expected. Okay, let's jump to our dashboard tool quick, because if it doesn't run, we should be able to see. So our tasks are now in there because we applied it, so we can see these tasks. It's going to show there's no pipelines at the moment, no pipeline runs. There is a pipeline resource. I'll get to that just now. But yeah, just going quickly to the task run, you can kind of, okay, let's have a look why it's not running. I was changing names late last night, so I have a feeling state containers with incomplete status. And so to check what's going on, you can check your pod. Oh, it's done. While I was debugging, it finished. It was obviously downloading the image for the first time, which actually makes sense. So it was going to take a while. Forgot that that kind of is a thing. So anyway, here we've got, we passed down custom value into the task. And I asked the task to display my custom value that I passed down from the little cow. So if we have a look here, there's where I defined that I'm going to pass parameters into this task. And then I just specified the task where I needed to as an argument. I'm taking a look quick at the second example. Hopefully, it shouldn't take too much longer. They're actually quick examples. So if we quickly have a look, well, actually, let's use our GUI because we went through the effort of creating it. Cool. So now we've got the second example quickly running. Great. So the first part of this, the first step in the second example, so now I've got multiple steps, retrieves the fortune, and then the second step passes that fortune through to the cow. So now the cow tells us fortunes. So you can kind of see I used the results, and then I took the results from the one and passed it through to the other using that approach. And now I'm quickly doing an example with pipeline resources to show you how to work with a repo. Cool. So running back quick to task runs. So it's pulling the repo. I'm going to give it some time. If I just show you what's quickly happened. So I've defined a pipeline resource with a URL. It's a public image that I've set up. And it is just a empty repo already. It's got like an empty Docker file. And it says this, it has a little image of a bunny jumping saying hello, which you can't see there, but it is cute, take my word for it. And it was literally just a step that went, okay, cat workspace readme. So this repo was pulled into the workspace. Okay, 2 more examples left. So that was task runs, and you don't really want to do task runs. That's too modular, too granular for this kind of pipeline process. You actually want to run the pipeline runs, and the pipeline runs will trigger the pipelines, and that will trigger the task runs. So you'll actually interface mostly with these pipeline runs. So if you have a look, there's no pipeline runs at the moment. Oh, we first have to apply the pipelines. Go. So now we've got our pipelines waiting there. And then let's quickly trigger the pipeline runs. Cool. Now we have a pipeline running. And this is now, this pipeline is referencing the tasks that we've already added into. So the Git repo task that we specified here is what it's referencing there. And so it just reran the third example for us. So there's my empty image with the bunny jumping and saying hello. If you have a look quick, and this is the last example. Here is an example of multiple tasks being referenced in a pipeline. So it's referencing the fetch from Git one that we've just done, as well as the Funbox example. So now it's doing both of those tasks in this pipeline. Cool. So there we have the README coming through, and we've got the little cow saying the fortunes. So that's kind of a quick, lightweight demonstration of how to play around with Tekton. And the repo is available. I'll share it in the discussion, in the chat, I mean. And if you want to keep going, I've added, there's Tekton pipeline examples in the Tekton pipeline repo. You can also play around with triggers a bit, so you can kind of get that event thing happening. And yeah, I've also got some other Tekton examples if you want to take a look. And I've also done a demo of how to get started with Kaneko, which kind of helped me understand how Kaneko works, if that helps anyone. Cool, thank you.
Thank you, Cari. You definitely deserve this. Really well done. We have a question like from Martin, who asks, is it possible to schedule your tasks and pipeline?
Like with a cron job, I think it should definitely be possible. You can use cron jobs like normal Tekton cron jobs and trigger the task runs. I mean, sorry, the pipeline runs. So if you trigger your pipeline run, you could, pipeline runs work really nicely with Customize, because in Customize can kind of create that time stamping and all of that for you. So yeah, I hope that helps. But there's no, as far I haven't come across, I might be wrong, but I haven't come across a native Tekton way to do scheduling. But I think it's because you can use so many other things to interface the scheduling, like cron jobs.
Does that answer your question, Martijn? I hope it does.
Yes, it does. Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Awesome.